we will go further. Let me introduce Dr. Baris with his lecture Up in the Air, Shifting the Maimonides Conceptualization of Doubt. For Dr. Baris to know, we have not far from this building we are sitting in, we have some well-known, long-time Russian institute, secular, which has the name Maimonides. Really, we call it Academia.
Thank you very much. People have opened with personal notes before. Since Baris is actually Barishansky, and the family emigrated from Russia to the United States in different stages. But in 1881, my great-grandfather, Mikhail Barishansky, made it from the Minsk area because he was too tired of waking up at 4 o'clock in the morning to feed the cows. And the family came later, so I feel like I'm on stable ground. So thank you very much for coming and for staying. Okay. The discussion we'll talk about, and Shai has heard much of this before, but the developments, the very well-known position that Maimonides has taken regarding to factual doubt. And that is the Maimonides position that the decision rule, the Talmudic decision rule, saying that cases of factual doubt are to be dealt with leniently in rabbinic cases, stringently in biblical cases, is really of rabbinic origin. And the law, as Rambam says, Rambam Maimonides says, that it is well known, it is clear, Devar Yadua, that all the instances, basically, of factual doubt are to be dealt with stringently only as a matter of rabbinic ordinance, or as better known in Hebrew, Sfeka Deoraita L'chumra Rak Midrabanan. And the Rambam posits his position in the laws of the impurities of death. It is clear that all these impurities and their likes are deemed impure in virtue of doubt are of rabbinic origin. That the only impurities of biblical origin are those that are certain. But all the rest, whether pertaining to forbidden food, or incest, or Shabbat, are of concern, the Chumrah, only due to rabbinic enactment of rabbinic ordinance, as we have explained in laws of forbidden relations and elsewhere. So the topic today will be on this rule. This is the core text. My claim will be, in case we lose a touch later, my claim will be that the Rambam really had a conceptual issue he was grappling with, and then he changed his mind. And the text shifts, the variant texts that reflect this shift in his position, I think reflecting the conceptual issue that lies behind it. So this is the core text, the way it stands today. The examples that Maimonides refers to, and this is good for explaining the issue, two prominent examples are, for instance, the leniency in accepting evidence in matters of permitting a woman who was once a captive to remarry a priest, a dut shvuya, which is not a trivial matter, but the rabbis went to great lengths, almost like the Adunah, to accept evidence that would be otherwise impermissible. And the Rambam gives the rationale, since stringency in all cases of doubt is rabbinic. We're lenient with the ex-captive because the whole prohibition is only of rabbinic origin. The same holds true. We know that biblically, a piece of cloth, a garment that is a mixture of flax and of wool is forbidden to wear. Sha'arei, kilayim. If a thread is lost in a garment, whether it's a flax thread lost in a wool garment, a wool thread lost in a piece of flax garment, you looked for it, you couldn't find it, but you're not sure that it's not there. That would be a question of suffix. Can I wear the garment? Can I wear the coat? And the halacha is that one can do so. Why? We have already explained in the laws of relation, forbidden relations, Isurei Biyah, that all of the prohibitions that are due to rabbinic, that are due to factual doubt, are rabbinic status. And because a person checked and did his best, and there's nothing that's obvious, since the whole Isur itself, the whole prohibition itself is rabbinic, the rabbis were lenient in that matter. Now, I'd like to have a second look at the core text, and here's the main issue. The core text, as we said before, mentioned the fact that where doubt is factual and is the cause for concern, for practical concern regarding biblical prohibitions, that the whole status of this thing is only the Rabbanan, only a rabbinical source. There are some texts that end with the following clause. Afal pichem, nonetheless, prohibitions that are punished by karet, which means being cut out of the Jewish people, this world, the next world to come, I won't go into details here. Their doubt is prohibited biblically. Since the transgressor is obliged to bring a sacrifice, the hanging or the suspended guilt offering, known in Hebrew as the Asham Totally. And there are other texts that add the next clause, Moshe B'Alma B'Chosh Gavot, as it's been explicated, as I have myself explained in the laws, in the sacrificial laws that pertain to this particular issue. So the thing is here, the Rambam adds a whole paragraph of an exception. The exception is that in severe cases, doubt is to be dealt with stringently, even biblically. And the reason is because we find a special sacrifice of atonement for these types of issues. Someone who by mistake is not sure whether he by mistake transgressed the law has to bring a sacrifice. Now, it's hard to imagine bringing a sacrifice to something that was permitted. Let me just explain this one more time. We don't know whether it's treif or not. We don't know whether something is forbidden to eat. If it's just a piece of kosher meat or a piece of non-kosher meat, then biblically, doubt would not have its own rule saying that one has to be stringent. The rule as we know it, that doubt is to be done with stringently, is a rabbinic origin. But if this was something that would necessitate a sacrifice, as in a certain subsection of prohibitions, for instance, things that have to do with the part of fat that's called chelek, or things that have to do with Shabbos, certain aspects of incest, there is a sacrifice to atone for the error. And that seems to mean, logically, that the act itself was forbidden. Otherwise, why bring sacrifice? But the problem is the text, not only the concept. If you look, for instance, at Rav Yosef Kapach's edition, his comment is the following. This whole addition at the end doesn't make sense conceptually. We'll talk about that in a second. But even beyond that, he says, the prints added a section in brackets. Some prints were brazen enough, chatzufim, to remove the brackets. It is clear the addition was added by the person who was responsible for all the corrupted text in the printed editions. This is the source of all the mistakes that ever existed. It's absent from all the Yemenite manuscripts in my position. He only had Yemenite manuscripts. It could not be authentic. The language is unclear. It doesn't exist. It's an error. This is student added in. This is an addition that doesn't belong. It's wrong. There's no manuscript basis for this whatsoever. Now, many of the manuscripts, the predominant critical mass of manuscripts, would support Rav Kapach's opinion. I quote to here the Spanish one from mid-13th century that doesn't have those words at the end. I won't read it here. Another one from the 15th century. These are taken from the Hebrew University Library text. And it ends where that initial core text ended. But, watch this. The British Library has, on record, one of the manuscripts does have that additional clause. We're talking of 14th century, 13th century. שהרי העושה אותו חייב באשם תלוי כמו שהוא ביאם לו לדחות גדול. It's there. But not only is it there in the Spanish style cursive in the British Library manuscript, but in Rav Kapach's edition, here I marked the additional section, but in Rav Kapach's collection, okay, what you see at the bottom line is that particular edition as an edition in the manuscript. And to make it large, that's what it says. In other words, אף על פי go back a second. אף על פי כן דבר שחייבים על זדונו כרת, אפילו אסור מן התורה, ספקו אסור מן התורה, שהרי עושה אותו חייב באשם תלוי. That's the section. It's in the Yemenite manuscript, but it's there as an edition, as a manuscript edition, that's in the interstices at the end of the chapter. So what's going on? My claim will be that the Rambam is grappling with a conceptual issue, that he himself added on the text. There are other testimonies to the original authenticity of the text, but he changed his mind conceptually, added the section, and of course, in the pre-internet day, if you add additions, you add sections that are there and it's already out in the markets, in the streets itself, then there's no way to recall it or to have it, to propagate the amendment. If we look at, for instance, the Shut Maharit, the Maharit in the 16th century talks about the conceptual issue. If we have doubt, the question is a yes-no question, a touch-and-go question. Do we do an action or not? That shouldn't be dependent on the question of the severity of the punishment. Whether you transgress a red light or a parking fine shouldn't make a difference, or the size, the magnitude of the punishment shouldn't make a difference. And that's why Maharit's conclusion is that this is a student's addendum, Agahat Talmid. Makes no sense to differentiate by the severity of the punishment. If we look at the manuscript evidence, though, the Frankel edition talks about the fact that from 1574 and on, and this includes manuscripts, Yemenite manuscripts, and the Rahabach of Leib and Chabib in the 16th century talks about a Sefer Mugah, which is usually the term for texts that have undergone official supervision. The famous Sefer Mugah is the Rambam's own autograph, but the concept of a Sefer Mugah means that it's authentic, and indeed Rav Shilat in his edition concludes that the edition is authentic, among other reasons, because the edition at the end that says, as I have, or as we have explained elsewhere, would be even more brazen than the edition, because putting yourself in the Rambam's, forging the Rambam within the text seems to be beyond the limit of what a student would do. So saying in the text, I have explained elsewhere, would seem to be an exaggeration. So we have two texts out there. We have good manuscripts that don't have that. We have good manuscripts that do what's going on. The Asham Tolui, I may skip one here. The Asham Tolui, this hanging atonement, this hanging korban to atone for what's hanging there exactly. I'd like to say that the Rambam himself was somewhat vague, somewhat ambiguous, and that his disciples kind of pulled him in different directions. What's hanging? If a person doesn't know whether he transgressed a sin unwittingly of a certain subcategory of the kareh, he brings the korban. And this is called talui, says the Rambam. This is suspended. Why? מפני שהוא מכפר על הספק ותולה לו עד שיוודע לו בוודאי. It hangs until he knows. Well, what hangs? What's suspended? And I'd like to suggest that there are two or three interpretations of this suspension, of this hanging, and this depends on what the concept is, what the issue, the philosophical issue dealing with doubt has to do. As Rav Shimon Shtum points out in Sha'arei, you can't bring atonement, or how can you bring something to atone for an act that was initially permitted? And there'd be two strategies for that. One is to say that there is a difference between rules of behavior and rules of atonement. I can do an act. It's my responsibility. Don't complain and don't comment and don't complain. If you do it, it's up to you. It's your risk, and there's nothing especially wrong with it except for the fact that you assume the possibility, the risk of the possibility that you're doing something wrong at the core action. But there could be another way of looking at it, and that is to say that the rules of behavior and the rules of atonement are identical, which would necessitate creating a subsection of actions that is intrinsically forbidden, witness the fact that a korban sacrifice is brought afterwards to atone. I'd like to say that the Rambam took both these strategies at different stages of the text. First, let's look at the word, what it means to suspend, to hang. The Sefer Mitzvot Gadol of Moshe Kutzi's book, the great book of commandments, which really sits on Maimonides, although he is a Tosafist, talks about Torah as something that protects the sinner from punishment, from divine wrath. And this is true also in commentaries of the Rambam, like Mari Kurkus in the 15th century, that talk about Toleh, Mechapel Toleh Lahagen Min HaYisurim, to protect from suffering that may be inflicted because of the possible sin. The source of this is Talmudic, and the Gemara twice talks about unique qualities, unique characteristics of this particular sacrifice. One is that if it turns out that there was a sin, you bring another korban, you bring another sacrifice. This is brought even before sin is acknowledged. These are things that are considered extraordinary when it talks about atonement. And the Talmud talks about the compassion that the Lord has for the bodies of Israel. The Torah is out there to protect the Jew, even if he did not sin, but he might have sinned. It was a permitted act, but he still may need protection. You're allowed to swallow whatever the unidentified pill was, but if you become sick, you'll need some kind of an antidote. What's interesting is that when the Rambam paraphrases that clause, he doesn't talk about something which is a realistic, metaphysical, even magical type of protection. He internalizes it to make it psychological. He talks about "Shetishkot nafsho bekach v'lo yish'er tachat pachad lo shu lidava." He talks about internal fear of sin as opposed to something that is metaphysical and out there that needs protection. But the chinuch, again, following Maimonides' system of counting the 613 commandments, talks about toleh, suspension, as something that is conditional. We mention things that are suspended only when it's conditional because it may turn out to be something else. If it turns out that a person did indeed sin, the original korban, the original sacrifice, is not enough. He needs a second one. But he doesn't say that the first one was superfluous. He says we need another one. And the language is, Niglaro sheharishon lo hispik lo v'tzarich levi od korban acher. It wasn't enough. Not that it was in vain. And if that's the case, he mentioned this twice. If that's the case, I think we can characterize the two strategies thus. If it's conditional, what it means is that the initial act of entering doubt was sinful. That itself is a sin. If it turned out that the sin included the poison of the sin at the basis, you need a second sacrifice. But what it means is that the initial entering the sphere of sin was sinful. You need the second korban if it turns out it's for real. But the first attitude, the first strategy, which said there's no distinct sin in entering doubt, but it may be poison there, so you need the antidote to protect you from what may happen. But there's no intrinsic sin in entering doubt. And all of this has to do with the interpretation of the word tolet, to suspend, to hang. The Rambam wasn't clear about it. Conceptually, it can go either way. Rambam's language can go, it seems at first, either way. What I'd like to submit is that the Rambam changed his mind. We'll talk about this in a moment. I do take issue, briefly, with the idea that Toled means protection. I don't think the Rambam read it that way. We're influenced by the Gemara, we're influenced by Rashi, but when the Rambam talks, for instance, about Tshuva and Yom Kippur, that Yom Kippur and Tshuva, I'm sorry, I blocked it. I have to unblock it. I pushed the wrong button. Okay? I pushed the blocking button. His name was up there in the booth, many of them. Anybody from the technical area here? I have to unblock the, ask him. No, יש כפתור של סרופות עליו. It worked. Okay. It worked, sorry. We talk about the fact that on Yom Kippur, repentance and the Day of Atonement suspend the sin. But there's no true atonement until suffering is inflicted. Then Toleh cannot be to protect someone from suffering because we're waiting for that suffering to happen for full atonement to take place. If Tshuva v'Yom HaKippurim tolim v'yisurim gomin lo hakapara, tolim doesn't mean protect from suffering. We're waiting for that to happen. The pending suffering is what indeed eradicates sin. And to take another issue, which is even I think in sharper relief, the Sota, the deviant woman, if she was a scholarly woman, then the Torah that she taught, the Torah that she studied, tolela, suspends punishment. And what happens then? This is not politically correct, no. The protection here is, it doesn't happen all at once, but slowly, over a year or 2 or 3, she's inflicted with tremendous suffering until she dies slowly in agony. So obviously the concept of Toled that the Rambam is using, the suspension is not to protect someone from infliction, but it's rather to suspend it in time. That's something else. And the same thing happens when the Rambam talks about suffix regarding Tuman Tara. I won't go into that particular text. But what does it mean? To suspend means to suspend in time. As you would say, someone was suspended from school, or someone was suspended from his position. And it still means that there are 2 strategies. One strategy is that there was a sin in entering doubt. The second strategy is to say, it's up to you. There's nothing wrong about parking here. If it turns out it's illegal, you get the ticket. And it's up to you. It's your problem. That's what the Rambam was grappling with. The core text said, it's up to you. There's nothing special about doing something that you're not sure about. If you did it wrong, it's your problem. In which case, the concept of Toleh means not protection, but Toleh means, we'll protect you even internally. We'll defer punishment if indeed you did something wrong, if indeed it turns out that what you ate is a spiritual type of poison. And the Rambam, it didn't sit well with him, because there is this korban problem. And it didn't sit well dividing between the idea of atonement and what you can do, l'chatchila, ab initio. So he added, and this is what we find as an addition in those Yemenite texts and in later books as well, which says that last clause, that karet is a separate subsection, which implies that actually there is an identification between rules of behavior and rules of atonement. So what I'd like to say to sum up is that the initial question, the philosophical question, is not just a good question or a kasha or the acronym or something to be dealt with in the 20th century. I'm finishing now. To be dealt with in the 20th century or in the 16th century doesn't make sense. The Rambam had a philosophical problem. He had an idea. The rules, as he read the text, were that you're allowed to do things and take responsibility. There's no separate prohibition against entering doubt. But it didn't sit well with the question of atonement. Initially, he thought that was a non-question, and we could separate in our minds conceptually between what we do and what we have to ask forgiveness for. But it didn't sit well. So we added in this question of the kares. It doesn't fix everything because Shabbos and Arayot are all kritut, so it doesn't really mesh in with the rest. But this is the authentic second opinion of the Rambam. He adds it in as an afterthought, not en passé, but he really thinks about it, adds it in later, doesn't fix the rest of the texts that are out there, doesn't really mesh in, but it's there to point out the conceptual problem that he's dealing with. The texts are the ones that prove that point. And the word toleh actually hangs itself, is suspended in our interpretation, whether it means something that protects the person, suspends the punishment, or whether it means that actually there was a sin. And we'll only find out later whether there is a second sin as well. Thank you.